So I'm Andrew Brandt. I'm the Director of Threat Research at now Symantec, was at Blue Coat until recently, and wanted to talk to you. Now, normally my typical day job involves running a lot of malware in a lab and watching what it does and who it talks to and how it talks to those people. And that's interesting and all. And I'm actually going to get into some of that in my 1 o'clock talk today, where I talk about some Android malware that was pretty interesting. But this morning, since it's early and you guys need a little pepping up, so we're going to talk about video games and some of the issues that I've discovered with a game that I've been playing for a little bit over a year called Ingress. And Ingress is an augmented reality game, and that term was not very well known or understood up until the middle of this summer when Pokemon Go came out. And everybody suddenly understood what an augmented reality game is when that game hit and became such a huge phenomenon. And what was interesting about it is that Ingress players basically had been doing this for the last 3.5 years. And not only have they been playing augmented reality games, but they've also been building the framework that Pokemon Go was going to use for all of its Pokestops and gyms. All of that stuff was created basically by its player-submitted content that helped augment that game. So what we're going to talk about a little bit today, for those, can I get a show of hands if anybody here plays Ingress? It's not a huge, oh, good. So there's a bunch of people. I'm not going to ask you your faction or your agent name. And I'm not going to reveal my own, but it may become obvious throughout the talk. So I'm going to talk a little bit about fundamentals just for the people who don't know how the game is played. And then we're going to walk through some of these issues that we've seen where people have been abusing the game. And so, at the end, what I'm hoping is that there'll be a few minutes left at the end. And I'd love to hear any suggestions. Now, at the previous conference where I gave a similar talk to this, I got a bunch of suggestions from the audience about ways to kind of thwart these problems and present these issues, present them as potential solutions to Niantic, who's the publisher of both Pokemon Go and Ingress. And I'm hoping that we can get some of those suggestions together here as well. The one thing I got to tell you is that I have tried on multiple occasions to try to reach out to Niantic through a bunch of different means, and they have just been completely unresponsive. So I don't know whether or not they're actually interested in hearing these solutions, but we'll still give it to them anyway. So what's Ingress, right? So we talked about augmented reality. I think everybody understands that it's a game that takes place in sort of a hybrid between the real world and the virtual world. In this particular game, it's a sort of a paranoiac science fiction-y story that involves two factions vying for control of the world. You do that by basically capturing these locations within the world that are called portals. And then once you have 3 portals that are within a direct line to each other where there's nothing between them, you can connect these portals together and make these triangles, which then fill in the zone inside with the color of your faction. And this is called fielding. And really, like, all of the gameplay that happens at or near these portals. So going between the portals is just gravy for like capturing geolocation data and like tracking how many kilometers you travel. Everything is in metric in the game. All of these actions have to happen basically within a 40 meter radius of these portals. So, and as I mentioned, a lot of the information, a lot of these locations, as well as their descriptions, names, photographs, were all submitted by Ingress players and then taken in and sort of reused in Pokemon Go, so that you can see on the left sides of these two parallel pictures, you've got the portal, and then if you recognize the Pokemon universe, like that's the sort of the Pokemon Pokestop version of the same thing. And you can see they're even using some of the same pictures, the same names, same descriptions, and obviously they're at the same location. So everything that happens within the game requires this stuff called exotic matter. You get exotic matter by walking around. You also get exotic matter by picking up stuff called power cubes and using them. There's this concept of a game within a game called glyphing or glyph hacking, where you do a little puzzle matching thing where you try to draw these archaic-looking symbols that appear on a kind of a field of dots and replicate that within a 12 to 15 second time frame. And then I mentioned linking and fielding and learning about basically there's two ways of scoring. There's a set of personal scores that you can get to advance yourself, and then there's scoring for your faction, which is pretty much done by doing the linking and fielding. All right, so and then there's this concept of doing strategizing when you're not necessarily out in the field. There's this thing called the intel map, and it's actually valuable if you play Pokemon as well, which is why I think a lot of people who are playing Pokemon or started getting into AR gaming through Pokemon have now recently joined Ingress, not necessarily to play Ingress, but to get access to this, because you have to have an Ingress account. And what it does is it gives you a map of all the portal locations in the world, almost like a Google map, and it lets you zoom in and out at almost any magnification. You can see the dots represent all of the portals that are visible. Now at this magnification, it's only showing the longest links and the sort of the most strategic fields, but as you go down further and further, you start to see more and more precision in the data, just like that. So down at the street level, you can see every single place where there might be a Pokestop. So the other, I mentioned the map, the other elements are this glyph game. Badges are just ways that you can sort of have bragging rights among your friends for being able to accomplish certain tasks. And then there's also another game within a game in Ingress where the game publishers have this whole, there's a backstory that's sort of continuous, that's part of the game. And they have hired actors to basically play this as almost like a television series or a serial, where the story is ongoing. The various actors who play these characters within the backstory of the game release videos and other images, and those things have artifacts in them that are sometimes steganographically hidden within the images or the videos that allow you to discover even more stuff. And so there's a whole subculture of people who play Ingress who just tear apart the videos that are released by Niantic, trying to figure out ways of extracting useful information out of those videos, and often find really interesting things. And then the sort of the other piece of this is that in addition to just playing individually or in small groups, periodically Niantic has these events called anomalies, which are essentially put together by the local factions players in a certain city. Niantic decides the cities where these things are going to happen and the day, and then the local teams get together and kind of organize the rest of it. And you get sometimes hundreds of people coming to a city on a certain day to play in these anomalies. And for people who are hardcore athletes and really want to strain themselves and are interested in the physical fitness aspect of this, there are these events called Go-Ruck events, where almost militaristic sort of maneuvers in the dark, wearing a backpack with 40-pound weights in them. People will run several kilometers and do things, and that gives their teams an advantage the next day when they do the anomaly. So just some screenshots from the game showing the badges, the glyphs here at the top, the detail on the badge, and passcodes, these things that people try to sneak out of the videos and things. So so in the course of doing this analysis, as I mentioned, I do a lot of this stuff with malware in the lab, and we're doing data extraction and recording of the network traffic when the malware is doing its thing. And we also, the company I work for makes a product that does man-in-the-middle SSL decryption. So it was kind of a natural fit for me to do this analysis, because here I had a lab, and I do IoT and mobile device analysis. And so I already had phones that were connected to this network and had the certificates set up that they could decrypt the SSL. So it was a natural thing to kind of take a look at what you can discover within the game. And there's quite a lot, actually. So all of the Ingress in-game communications happens within the app. Obviously, there are text messages between players where they can send each other messages. They can send broadcast messages out to all players for their faction or all players everywhere. There's also there's a way to communicate with people from the Intel map as well. It's basically a parallel of the game. And then the game itself is constantly streaming information up to Niantic servers, receiving information back from them. So it's this sort of ongoing, never-ending traffic of data that's going back and forth. And as you can see, the communications within the game very similar to look to each other. They actually do contain exactly the same information, both on the map as well as the in the game. So to do my interception, I'm using these tools that I mentioned earlier, this network traffic capture, man-in-the-middle SSL decryption, and my own wireless access point that's connected into this network so that only the machines that are connected to that network can be sniffed. And when you install these SSL certificates that allow you to do the man-in-the-middle SSL decrypt on a phone, particularly on Android, you do get these warning messages that pop up basically persistently on the phone that let you know you could be monitored. Doesn't necessarily mean you're being monitored all the time, but just having an intermediate cert on the phone that you've installed automatically sort of triggers these messages to pop up from time to time. It's worth noting that there is full disclosure that this is happening, right? And so this is just a screen grab of the UI from this product that we're using that's called the SSL Visibility Appliance. I'm not going to get into that, but basically it's the box that does the decryption, and it spits out the unencrypted traffic to another thing that I can use to look at it. And the logs show things like the cipher suite that's being used by the SSL traffic, and also the server names and IP addresses connected to that traffic, and whether or not the certificate was valid, whether or not the SSL decrypt actually worked. And occasionally you do see some weird ones, like the one second from the bottom where it says bad record MAC address. So initially, when you start the game, the first thing that it does is that it connects into Google, and it uses their OAuth to authenticate you using your Google account. Now, it's worth noting that Niantic is actually a spinoff from Google, that they started out as a division within Google, and eventually Google just kind of spun them out to be their own company. If the UI of the map looks familiar, it's because they're using Google Maps. They're using all of the Google APIs basically to communicate and to share this information back and forth. And so, of course, they're going to use Google's OAuth to authenticate you, and that has continued even though the companies have separated. What we're able to see here is, for example, that the app name highlighted in red is com.nianticproject.ingress, and I've blacked out basically the UUIDs and other critical stuff that would let you log in as me. In addition, there's this weird traffic that happens at the beginning that's called cloud-to-device management. Now, this was a project that was created also by Google, and then deprecated, and so basically turned off, and yet Ingress continues to use this cloud-to-device management API at login time. I'm not really sure why. It just happens. Then the first contact with Niantic is this HTTPS post traffic, where the client will send up its basically a hex representation of the latitude and longitude up to Niantic, and then Niantic is supposed to then send down a bunch of information about what's happening in the local area around you, right? Just so you can draw, so it can draw the map. It's got pictures. It's going to have the names of the portals. It's going to have their locations and all of the related information about the client itself. It was notable that the app actually does use its own custom user agent called Nemesis, which turns out to have been the internal name of the game when it was in early alpha. As they were developing it, they called the game Nemesis. So the first response from the server, as I mentioned, comes back with this flood of information. So all the chat messages that have been transmitted recently. It's also sending your location back to you in decimal this time. So it sends it up in hex, and it sends it back to you in decimal, and it's not really sure. I'm still not really sure why that happens. And then there's all of this information that's coming back, as well as not just about the chat, but also about your full inventory and everything that you have that's connected to your account. So every single time you log onto the game for the first time, it's pushing your inventory back to you. That's probably just an anti-cheat method to make sure that you can't artificially fiddle around with that data on your phone and then get stuff for free, right? Here's just some more detail from the post, and the response from the Niantic server is to say sup. Right, and here's the screenshot that shows basically all of the inventory as well as the configuration settings for the game. Now this is kind of interesting because, again, you would think that the rules of the game would be hard-coded into the client, and in fact, what I discovered is that they're not. They're actually transmitted down to the client, basically the thresholds that define how the game is going to work in basically every way, and all of the parameters that it uses to define how the game is going to function are sent down at this initial check-in every single time you start the game. Right. Now, in addition to the Google OAuth and the communications with Niantic directly, the app also has several mobile analytics tools built in. And this is not an unusual thing. This is something that's pretty common within the mobile app industry. You have these basically these companies whose job is to create an API that allows you to see, if you're a developer, how your app is being used. And the idea being that you want to be able to debug problems, figure out if there's ways of improving your user interface and your user interactions within the game. And so there's nothing nefarious or necessarily damaging about the fact that these APIs exist. It's just, this is just another aspect of the game and another aspect of mobile apps that we see when we decrypt the traffic. And what you can see here is that one of the analytics is called Upside API. And it turns out that Upside API is also used by Niantic to do some of their in-app purchasing as well. So a lot of this is tied to commerce. And so when they do that, they want to basically make sure that the transaction is legitimate and that it's happening. There's money involved. This is where actual dollars change hands. And they use the Google Play sort of commerce system, but a lot of the validation of the device itself and the account is happening through Upside, and the handling of the exchange of money for goods in the game, virtual goods, is all done through Upside. So in this initial check-in, what you see here is that we basically have this huge amount of data about the phone itself that's being transmitted up to Upside, and that includes the manufacturer and the model, the carrier that it's using. Of course, the GPS location as well goes to Upside API, and just a ton of information about how the phone works, the resolution of the screen, the phone number it's using, their IMEI, what network it's on at the moment, as unique IDs that basically identify this particular customer, this particular account. And just a ton of information that's going to this third party, which you may or may not actually be aware is happening. There's also a different analytics tool called Criticism, and what's not clear is exactly what Criticism is being used for. Very similar information is being transmitted to them as well in the form of this like JSON. And it's including the what the mobile network is. It's possible that what Niantic is doing is they're using these APIs in addition to their own internal data collection to try to determine when someone is sort of forging traffic or doing fiddling around with the communications, which is what we're going to talk about in a few minutes here. In addition, there are these. So once you've sort of got these initial handshakes that happen, as I mentioned, the thing is basically streaming content back and forth between Niantic and the device, which is probably why, in addition to driving the GPS basically constantly the whole time the game is on, why you see these Ingress players carrying around these big giant batteries that they always have with them, these external batteries. I always have at least 2 of them when I'm out playing because I'll play for hours at a time. And without, at least an additional 10,000 milliamp hours of charge, my phone is just not going to last. And it just chews through data and GPS like nothing. and is constantly cycling through what's in your inventory, what's in the local area, what's going on in chat, are any of your portals being attacked, are you attacking anybody else's, and like all of this data is just constantly flowing back and forth, which just eats up a lot of power and a lot of network traffic. What's most interesting to me, out of all of these constant streams of data that's going back and forth, are these things called paginated plexts. These are basically traffic that's being sent back and forth, usually coming from the cloud, but also kind of transmits up periodically with the locations of the player at that moment, where they are having an interaction with a portal or with something else, and also the physical locations of all of the portals and the communications that are happening when players type out messages to themselves and to each other. By the way, this information is transmitted to everyone who's playing all the time. So even if the UI doesn't necessarily represent that it's receiving all of this data constantly, the phone is receiving it, and it may or may not be shown on screen, but it's all being received. And so as we're sniffing this traffic, we're seeing tons and tons of information that's actually not visible within the game about things that are happening in the world physically nearby where the device is. There's also this weird TLS traffic that goes to a Google server on this port 7275. And what we discovered when we did a little bit of digging into it is it's using this weird protocol called the user plane location protocol. And it's this, it's a non-secure, except for the SSL, it's this non-secure way of understanding physical location based on triangulation with mobile transmitter towers. So this ULP is basically happening at the same time as everything else periodically. And again, I just had no idea that this was going on. Perhaps it's a way for Niantic to validate information that's coming from the location services in the phone, but we don't know. Right, here's a screen grab of like the packets showing this ULP traffic, and you can see that one of the things about ULP, because it's using cell towers, and cell tower locations are fixed points on the Earth, is that you can get, if you have enough cell service towers that are visible, an incredible amount of precision on your location. And like in this case, you can see it goes to something like 7 decimal points of precision on some of the locations, which is definitely enough to drone strike a player if they really wanted to. Not that they're going to do that. We're not going to say that Niantic is trying to. Now, to take a step back and look at Niantic's other game, Pokemon Go, what we're seeing in that game is that there's a lot of similar types of regular communication that's happening. Now, again, they use Google OAuth to communicate, but then they also, because it is a kid game and that there are players who are under 18 who are using the game, or under 16, I can't remember what the actual rule is, they actually have 2 different authentication methods. If you're an adult, you get to use your Google account and sign in with your Google account. If you're under 16 or 18, you then have to use, Nintendo has a service called the Nintendo Players Club, and you have to create an account through them, and it authorizes your account through them. And so, unlike Ingress, it's using a generic, Android Dalvik user agent string, so you can't necessarily tell that it's Pokemon Go traffic just by the user agent, but you can obviously tell it is by the fact that it's talking to Niantic Labs. And if you're decrypting the SSL, what you can see is that they're sharing a lot of the same. They're using a lot of the same data, not just the names of the portals and the pictures, but Niantic has a particular hashing algorithm that they use for a unique ID for each portal and player and other items within the game, and that information is basically parallel within the 2 games. So the grayed out thing that I circled in red, which I didn't actually show the whole thing because I didn't want to give it away, but basically it's the same string of 32 bytes of hexadecimal that basically is the UUID, in this case of a portal / Pokestop within the game. the other interesting thing, yeah, here's the screenshot of the Google OAuth that they use for when you log in using the that Nintendo Players Club, and but you can see that they're basically doing, single sign-on.pokemon.com, sso.pokemon.com, and it's doing all this session token exchange with the client. That's very similar to what they're doing in Niantic. Now, the other interesting thing that's being transmitted in addition to the OAuth is the birth date of the player who's playing is actually transmitted in this OAuth. And you can see it's down at the bottom, in the very bottom right corner. It says birth date, and I kind of highlight, blurred it out. But basically, the idea is that this is, really personal information about an underage player that's being transmitted over the network. And sure, we can trust SSL, I hope. So let's talk a little bit about how how data scraping basically happens. So I mentioned these paginated plex, right? And these paginated plex contain a huge amount of data, and the game can be set to either receive them in a very narrow geographic area, or you can set it to sort of like a universal receive messages from everywhere in the world all the time. And so the sort of the bigger the radius that you choose in a little slider within the UI in the game, the more of this data that you get. And if you have a phone like mine where you've configured it to decrypt all the SSL and you're recording all that traffic, you can actually receive a huge amount of information about every player action that's happening in the world all the time, like a feed of everything that Niantic is getting, you get a copy of. And there are people who have created these massive databases. They've been doing this for years. They've been collecting this data, indexing these JSONs into databases, and making them searchable. And so these player trackers basically exist now, and they have for a while. And I'm going to show you a little bit about what they're capable of doing. And really, what they were created for in the beginning was to try to figure out where there were players who were doing cheating activities, who they are, what their agent name was, and so that they can be reported up to Niantic. As a side effect of the existence of these databases, there's an enormous amount of player tracking information that is available to the people who have access to these databases. Now, I do not have personal access to these databases, and I only have heard of them secondhand from people who do have firsthand experience of not only using them, but of using them specifically to hunt for cheating players who they can report to Niantic. My argument is that the existence of these databases, while it is made in the best of spirits and the best of intentions, is a major threat to all of the players who are in the network. So this past summer, my own experience with this was that I had an opportunity this year to go to the UK, to go to England and Wales, and I was there for 5 weeks. And of course, while I was there, I'm out there playing Ingress as hard as I can in this foreign country, because you get lots of special badges for being able to hack portals for the first time, capture portals for the first time. And the more different places you get to go, the quicker you're going to get these badges. And so I actually was very proud of the fact that I was able to not only hack, but capture all of the World Heritage Site castles in Wales. So Beaumaris Castle, Conway Castle, and Carnarvon Castle are all World Heritage Sites. And then on top of that, I was able to capture the UK's most haunted castle, Gwydir Castle, as well. So it was a fun time for me. So while I was doing this, though, what I didn't realize is that all of my player interactions in the game were being recorded by these trackers. And people in the US who I knew who used these trackers were actually able to see a heat map of where I was most active during that 1 week that I happened to be in Wales. And yeah, that's really freaky to see just how precise they were able to pinpoint my common locations in the places that I habituated, because I was staying in Conway, but played a lot in Llandudno. That's that area that's in bright pink there in the middle. So yeah, there's a huge amount of data that's being indexed, and like as I mentioned, it's being done for the best of intentions. So one of the things that these guys try to do is they're trying to find players who are using cheating methods to find other players' portals that they've been hanging on to for a really long time and defending. And there are players who go out and just look for those portals and try to kill them as a kind of a form of griefing, or to kind of give people a hard time. they'll wait until the day before they're about to get a badge for holding the portal and then kill the portal. Those people are called guardian hunters. And there's actually this leaderboard that shows you who are the players that have the most number of guardian kills and how many days old was the guardian when it got killed. And according to the people who use this database, this is actually a very effective way of discovering these trolly players who are out there just to give people a hard time and make it a nuisance to play the game and make it not fun for other people. I guess they derive a lot of pleasure out of just screwing with people, and I find that personally offensive. And I just think it's nasty. There's just no reason for that. So there's different, like I said, that was one leaderboard that showed some of the Guardian Hunter data. Here's a detail page from a different database service that shows, now the player names and some of the details have been blurred out just to obscure the service, because again, technically we're not really supposed to, as Ingress players, not supposed to let everyone know that this exists. And yet I think it's really important that you know that this exists, because it shows all of the portals that the person carries at the moment, where they've been, how long they've been playing, when they first started, what's their normal area of operations, where they started playing and continue to play. Huge amount of information basically about these, about every player, right? So here's data that was captured from about my own account. So it shows all my badges and what level the badges are, where I first played. Now I started playing, funny enough, the first time I ever played Ingress was here in Utah, although I live in Colorado. I had a meeting with a bunch of my colleagues who came out from Norway, and they were all pretty heavy into the game, and they said, oh, you really got to try this game out. And they took me out and, while we were here in Utah, and played for a couple of nights. And so it shows me as having started the game in Utah, even though that's not my normal place there. And it also shows, my score as a Guardian Hunter is gold. Had no idea that was the case. Here's more details about for example, the portals that I hold, as well as the number of days that I've held them for. So my Guardian, which was up here in the upper left, at that time that screen was taken, I had been in possession of it for 262 days. And it is generally accepted practice within the game. You do not talk about your Guardian. It is considered poor OPSEC to talk about your Guardian. But I broke that OPSEC once I had reached the sort of 180-day max on my Guardian. I felt a little bit more comfortable about the fact that I could talk about it with people. I mentioned it to a player that I had just met in the UK and who was on my faction. And he said, oh, how are you set for Guardian? And I'm like, oh, I'm good. And I kind of showed him the number of days that I had a Guardian for. Within 12 hours of showing him that, a fake player had gone and killed my Guardian. So I learned my lesson pretty quickly that basically you have to maintain good OPSEC even among people within your own faction, because you never know where that information is going to go. And it was just entirely, I mean, it may have been entirely coincidental, but it didn't feel like it, because it was a spoofed player that went and kind of killed my Guardian, which was in Texas when I was in the UK, and it felt very weird to me. So, and you can see it down at the bottom here. There was even some of the UK portals that I had at that point for a number of days. So the biggest issues that I can see is that it allows these unscrupulous players to kind of go out and target your most valuable assets within the game, and that's going to, that kind of level of griefing is really obnoxious, but it also just engenders a lot of hostility among the players. People get really, really angry when they feel like they've been working hard. They may have had to hike to the top of a mountain to capture that portal, and then some guy goes in with doing spoofed GPS data to pretend that they're at the top of the mountain and take that portal away from you. It feels very wrong, and it is wrong on a lot of ways. But the flip side of these databases is that they do actually help determine when players are cheating and identify those players fairly readily. So there's kind of a gray area as to whether or not they should be kept. And honestly, I'm not going to make a point about whether or not they should be kept. I honestly think that this is a job that Niantic should be doing, and not the players. The players should not be policing themselves. And the fact that the players have access to this level of precise details about the habitual areas that players use and are interacting in can lead to a number of problems. So So let's talk about a little bit about this GPS spoofing, because I've kind of skimmed the surface on it, but I want to get into the details of it. So when I use the term spoofing, what I mean is using forged GPS data on the device or on in software to basically fool a device into thinking that it's in a physical location that it isn't actually located at. And there are bots that can do this spoofing and perform automated actions within an area. So there's the bots and spoofers are kind of hand in hand, and a lot of the same tools are used to do both things. This is just a fake badge that someone created to kind of mock the concept of spoofing, right? Because it's basically a form of griefing. So inherent in this is the ability to lie to both the app and to the phone about where you are. And it's very difficult to do that because for the most part, it's all happening within services. Now, in the Android universe, it's kind of, it's relatively easy to do it. It's a little harder to do spoofing in the iPhone universe just because of the closed ecosystem. So in Android, there's this thing called the exposed framework. And the exposed is this tool that allows you to very precisely control which services and which device, which hardware pieces within your phone are able to communicate with which applications. And you need to use the exposed framework if you're going to be doing GPS spoofing in order to prevent Niantic from discovering that, for example, the GPS coordinates and your mobile network coordinates are way off. Because that's a pretty strong indicator that you're doing spoofing. So it does take a lot of effort to do it. You need to have a custom firmware on the phone that you can use to flash zip files onto the phone so that they can be installed outside of the context of the operating system user land. And then you also have to be able to root the phone and have root access to run this. There's also an exposed APK that needs to be running at the same time. But basically, once you have all those pieces put together, you can then very, very tightly and precisely control what each of the components of your phone is able to communicate to other pieces of the phone. And again, I'm not making a judgment call as to whether this is good or bad. I actually believe that people should be able to very tightly control every aspect of what their mobile device is doing at any given time. So I support the fact that this exists, but the fact that it's being used for this cheating, it kind of sucks. So let's talk a little bit about the bots, right? So bots are these automated processes that can go and do things in the game. Well, what can they do? They can do absolutely everything that a real player can do. They can hack or glyph the portals. They can get keys. They can follow basically paths that you create. And not only do they follow the paths, but they can actually, you can introduce an error rate so that it kind of looks like you're meandering along a path, like a person who's walking might walk across the street periodically to get a portal over here or over here. As Niantic has been in this arms race with the bot makers are becoming better and better at figuring out ways to get around the obvious things and even some of the less obvious things that can indicate when an account is using a bot. They can be, and what this screenshot here is showing is there's a town close to where I live that tends to have, there are certain players that everyone in the area knows are bots, and that those bots are being used to collect huge amounts of gear. And as they're doing that, they're also collecting a bunch of stuff that they don't need, including these keys within the game that allow you to create these links. So when you see bot players basically walking a path and just dropping, like shedding keys as they go, that's a pretty strong indication that there's been a huge amount of this bot activity going on, and that they're just dumping all the stuff that they don't need on the ground. And it shows up on the map as these like trails of keys and trails of low-level gear that the bot doesn't want. So it's kind of, ridiculous to see this kind of stuff happening, and yet it's frustrating as a player to be standing, like if you were standing at the corner where those two sort of streets full of keys are, to sort of see that thing happening and realize there's no one standing around you because it's 2 a.m. and you're the only person out there. It's very frustrating to experience that, and yet that's a sort of daily basis thing for some people. So yeah, what can they do with these bots? And what we're seeing is a number of different things. So they're using them for this GPS guardian hunting spoofing thing where they're killing people's portals, but they're also using them to harvest enormous amounts of the high level gear that allows you to blow up your enemy's stuff faster. And that can either be shared with the players locally, or it can be used to basically sell out in a kind of a third-party gray market where people will actually pay cash for this gear that the bots will harvest. It also basically creates this zero-effort attack method where you can literally sit in your living room at home, and if you decide that like the other team is doing something that you don't like, you can just like from your couch go and like kill their field without having to get up and go do it. And again, it's that level of obviousness that creates all the vitriol that we see in the player environment. So the players in my local geographic area created this infographic last year to talk about how these farm bots work. And I think this is one of the more interesting things. It's too small to read on the screen, so make sure you take a look at the slide deck, which the con is going to make available to you. But it is essentially showing how when these bots are playing, it's very obvious that they're bots, because the only way that they get any of the player experience points that kind of allow them to proceed within the game is by doing this glyphing. And they glyph at a rate that is beyond what a human can do. And they get to higher levels more quickly than a human can do from just normal playing. It's just at a certain point, the metadata that reveals that this is a bot is incredibly obvious to the player base. And yet these bot players don't get terminated until they get reported up to Niantic. Niantic, by the way, is only a company of about 55 employees. And they're responsible for both Pokemon Go and Ingress, and not just managing this sort of environment, but also building the game, adding new features, doing these anomalies. We're talking 50 people that are dealing with, in the case of Pokemon Go, a game that got to be bigger than Twitter in 10 days after its release. So it's an enormous responsibility, an enormous amount of difficulty for a team that small. And I know that they're hiring. So, if you're interested in trying to help, solve this problem and you live in the Bay Area, there's jobs there for you. Clearly they need the help, and relying on players to do all this work for them is just not working. So the biggest, most prolific bot that we see out there is this bot called Ganes. Ganes is sold by this Russian guy, and he basically takes every build of the game that they release, and he refactors it with his own code inside of it. And so when you buy Ganes, and install it, you're basically installing another copy of the Ingress client, but it has all of these extra features built into it. There's a couple of extra menus and a huge number of sliders that allow you to change parameters in the way the bot is going to move. And this is just showing some of the things that the bot can do on this screen. And I got a copy of Ganes. I didn't actually buy it, but I got it from another player who was doing research into this, and he gave me his old copy of the bot and told me, don't run this, because especially on your real device, because it will immediately flag Niantic to basically ban your account. So I had to buy a separate device to run this, and tore it apart. I do a fair bit of Android app reverse engineering, so I was able to pull the app apart and kind of look at its pieces. What's on the right-hand side of the screen here is just some of the options from the drop-down for the walk mode, right, that you can use. And for example, this particular app, you can create a path in GPS. You can either use My Tracks or Google Maps to kind of draw with your finger, or actually walk a path and create a recording of like the path that you've walked. And then you can stick that into the bot, and the bot will follow that with a certain amount of error, as I mentioned, as well as will it follow it in the same direction that you did? Will it reverse the direction that you did? Will it loop around and just do it over and over again? Just tons and tons of options for doing this. And, it is kind of embarrassing how easy it is for these bot operators, for the people who buy Ganes. They pay $12 to get access to it for 3 months, and they can do an enormous amount of, damage to player cohesion just in using this bot. But there's other tools that you can use to kind of do this. And, I stumbled upon this one when I was doing the research for this talk. So there's this company called Nox, right? And the website n.bignox.com, they're selling essentially what they call, well, they're not selling it. They were giving it away for free. They call it Pokemon Go Desktop. And when I saw this, I'm like, really? So I pulled it down and took a look at it. And what they're doing is they've created their own version of an Android emulator that allows you to run any app. But in addition to the app, it creates, there's a separate window that's next to the Android window that is a map window. And you can basically point and click with your mouse on the map, and it will just tell the GPS, the software GPS that's in their software, to put you there, and then all of a sudden in the game, you basically teleport to that location. So you do need the exposed framework if you want to prevent Niantic from figuring out that you're doing this, and you can install exposed and install all these other tools inside of Nox. And I downloaded this app and pulled it down and created a Pokemon account specifically to run on it. And it was extremely effective. So here's a screenshot just showing, like, there's the map window on the left and the sort of the virtual Android device on the right. And you just click in the map. You can type in your city or zip code into the map and search it like you could with Google Maps, and then zoom in and out and get to exactly the street you want to be on, and click, put a little pin in the map, and all of a sudden, poof, you're there at the Dushanbe Tea House in Boulder. So incredibly easy to do this, right? And really just everything about this sucks. You can forge the IMEI. You can forge the model of the phone that you're using. Geolocate yourself everywhere in the world, and nothing can tell that it's running in an emulator, right? There's no emulation detection possible within the apps, as far as I can tell. The only way that they can tell is by inferring stuff like, hey, you were in Boulder, Colorado, and then 30 seconds later you were in Provo, Utah. Like, oh, that might be an indication that something's wrong. But it might not also, because that's also what happens when you quit the game, turn your phone off, take a plane, and then come to the other place. And so it might, start up and immediately, start itself up like you were back in where you started. And then when the GPS comes on, like, poof, you're like in the new location. You see this thing happen when you start the game. So there's really no way for them to tell when this is happening. And honestly, it's this stuff that's the problem. So these are screenshots from the sort of black market of bot farmed gear. And the one I like the most is the one that you can specifically request 4 keys from any portal in the world for $10, and the bot will, the guys who run these will basically send their, GPS spoof their bot to go to that place, hack it until it get 4 keys, and sell it to you for $10. Honestly, I think that that's probably worth it for anyone who makes more than minimum wage, because it's a fair bet that amount of effort would take a normal person probably 30 to 45 minutes to do if they were playing the game the way that they're supposed to be playing it, and they can just pay $10 and let the guy in Russia send his bot there to do it. So why not? The biggest problem is that all of these things make the entire player base really angry, because the whole point of the game is to get out there in the world and be experiencing the world. So why should you put up with these guys who just use these bots to farm their stuff? There's no effort involved. There's no challenge to it. And really what it means is that both factions basically operate at the behest of the other faction, allowing them to do whatever it is that they want to do. So there are people on both sides who do this spoofing, who do this bot operations, and the rest of us who play the game the normal way are basically allowed to play because those guys let us. And so it makes everything that we do within the game basically worthless. It makes the entire game pointless. And so as much as I love this game, once I put this talk together, I started to get really down on this game. And honestly, I felt like quitting. And I'm not alone. Every time I go to Anomalies and you get a bunch of Ingress players together, the the fisticuffs come out and people get angry with each other. They accuse each other of cheating. And the reality is, in a certain percentage of cases, it's provably true. And there's a lot of players who will do this cheating and rub it right in people's noses because Niantic will do nothing to deal with this. This is the problem. The real problem is that there's no way to solve this unless we as a community get together and as one rise up and say, Niantic, deal with this, because this has the ability to kill this entire genre of games in its crib, basically. If we don't solve this problem soon, augmented reality games will just be a joke that will eventually just fade away. And I think they have a lot of, potential. So let's talk about some of the ways that, Pokemon Go sort of addresses some of these problems. I know I'm getting close to the end, so I want to give you guys a few minutes to talk, so I'll just run through these quickly. So Pokemon Go doesn't transmit, so there's no chat room within the game, and that means that a lot of the messaging that goes back and forth in Ingress that reveals player locations and actions does not get transmitted to every client. That's good. That eliminates the whole issue of scraping that creates these databases of player activity. That's a great thing. There's a much less information that's being transmitted within the game. I mean, it still sucks your battery down pretty hard, mainly because it's driving the GPS so much, but there's so much less information that's being transmitted. Although a lot of the information that is being transmitted is information about what's happening around you in terms of what gyms are nearby. So the gyms, the UUIDs, the GPS coordinates of all of the stuff is all being transmitted, but not the player actions, which is good. The way that I think that they can do this to fix this problem in Ingress is to basically to remove players' names from the details when actions are happening. So instead of saying Spike is killing Portal X that's right outside, they just say Portal X is under attack by a player, right outside, and therefore, it kind of eliminates the tying of actions to players, and it removes it does remove the ability to hunt for these, guardian hunters, but it also kind of eliminates this giant privacy issue of being able to, if you have access to one of these databases, find and locate individual players and where they habituate and what time of day they tend to be in certain locations. And I got to tell you, the biggest issue with these player scraping databases is that they have not just the potential, but they have actually been used to stalk players. There are players out there who are slightly less stable who have access to these databases, and there have been other players who have quit the game because they have been stalked to their homes, to their workplaces, to the park that they go to at lunchtime by people from the opposing faction who have followed them to these locations and figured it out using these scraping databases. This is a physical threat. It's a game where you think that you're just dealing with kind of these invisible avatars until you actually get out in the real world and you see there's a guy walking around glyphing in the park and you realize that's that guy. Well, people have been followed and harassed in the real world until the police have been called, restraining orders have been issued against players, and it's only going to get worse. So what else can be done? So these one of the things that I do in doing my malware analysis is I look at a lot of network traffic metadata as well as the content. And there's a lot of metadata that we know is being collected both by these analysis APIs as well as by Niantic itself in the app. And it really only takes a little bit of thinking to kind of come up with combinations of these metadata that would indicate when somebody's doing something bad or when it's a player that's doing things legitimately. And I think that it's probably a pretty simple process for the security-minded, hunter-focused, if any of you guys saw Grifter's talk yesterday, it was a great talk about hunting for malware. Like, there is that same mentality that needs to be taken by the people who are anti-cheating at Niantic. And so, it can be done. It's just, do they have the players or the employees available to do it? And then I think we need to basically have there needs to be a way for players who are being nasty, threatening, stalking. There needs to be a way to report those people so that just banning their account, they could just create another account, right? And so there needs to be a way of kind of tying the player, the human person, to the various accounts that they might be using and basically ban the human rather than ban the account. Some people have suggested that, you know, tying playing to a credit card or requiring a small credit card payment at the beginning of playing the game. And I think a lot of the issue with resistance to that is that it kind of inhibits people from starting playing the game because it kind of creates a barrier right from the beginning. But honestly, if you have the ability to kind of track human beings, it eliminates a lot of these problems. And then these are some of the suggestions from the B-Sides folks. And I want to open it up. If anybody has any suggestions, just raise your hand or yell out if you have any ideas on this. I mean, I can run through some of them, right? So one of the issues was to follow the money, and that's a great idea. The problem is it becomes very difficult to figure out when gear is being moved around. I know that information exists in Niantic's database, right? So the way that these bots work is that the bot will collect all this data and collect all this gear. Someone will pay the bot guy money to get the gear, and then the bot spoofs itself to a location and drops what's called a capsule with 100 of whatever the things are inside of it to the location that the player specifies. If you can track the user account that the capsule came from and the user account that picked it up, you can start to see the patterns of who's buying, who's selling. It's just a matter of looking, and it's just not being done. So does anyone have any comments or suggestions? I know there's a lot of players in the room. I just want you to know, I'm up here giving this talk because I love this game, and I want the community to be more cohesive. And what we've had so far has been great, but this could threaten the whole thing. It could all just come tumbling down. So I'm hoping that you will take this to heart and go back to your communities and work with me and with Niantic to kind of end this practice of these types of tools, because it could be the end of the whole genre. So I guess that's my time. So silent in here. Does anybody have any other suggestions? How can we fix this? Well, I'm hoping with enough pressure, Niantic will listen to these and other suggestions. I know that it's been a long time coming. With Pokemon Go, it really brought this stuff to the fore. So thank you all for your attention, and keep up the good work.